Welcome back everyone. So there's some great news. I'm gonna be finally reviewing my Vive Pro, which just recently came in, and I'm also going to be recording this video in 4K because I finally got my camera set up correctly. So hopefully there should be less blurriness in this video, and moving forward I'll be trying to record as much of my content, at least video-wise, in 4K. Most of my gameplays will still be in 1080p, but otherwise the video should now be a heck of a lot sharper. So with that out of the way, the Vive Pro has finally come in. As you can see, here's the headset, and I've already got the Pro attachment cable for the wireless adapter set up as well. So that's all kind of tidied up now, and I have it connected. Now, I'm not going to go over the specifics of how to do this whole connection and setup thing, mainly because there's been so many videos done on it already. I'm pretty much late to the party as far as that's concerned, but what I will be doing is I will be doing you guys some tips as far as how the setup should work, as far as where you should be putting the actual PCIe adapter for the wireless adapter, and whether or not you need a certain set of hardware to really meet the minimum requirements for this thing to really get this thing going. Now, in a later part of this video, I'm also going to be going over the extended battery pack that I have for the Vive Pro, because the wireless adapter chews through the stock battery pack quite a bit and really quickly. If you end up getting one of these anchor packs, which is a lot beefier, a lot heavier, but with a belt clip adapter, it makes life a heck of a lot simpler for you and allows you some really good gameplay time as far as that's concerned, so you'll be able to game for longer without having to stop and recharge or have to buy another battery pack for, I believe they're like 60 bucks off of the Vive store, off of Amazon. So this just makes your life that much simpler. It also makes the gameplay a lot easier for the most part, because again, you're not having to worry about when you're going to run out of juice for your battery pack all of a sudden. So without further ado, I'm going to go over my kind of basic setup for this thing, the way that I have it configured, and I'm also going to go over how to do this battery pack and give you my impressions of how it is that the wireless adapter works. Alright, so first and foremost, folks, as you can see up here, I have the actual wireless sender from my computer. I also have it extended with a cable from the stock cable all the way down to where my computer is underneath the table. But as you can see, it's at a fairly high position, almost mirroring the same kind of height that one of my base stations is at. Now this is a temporary setup while I end up moving my whole kind of rig down into the garage, and so this will no longer be necessary, but the cable extension makes it so much easier to mount this thing in a location so that you always get a good signal, and that way you're not having to wonder about losing your connection, because when the connection gets lost to this specific unit, then you will end up seeing like a kind of blue screen or just a blackout in your headset. So you definitely want to make sure that it's mounted up high, and that way you get the best coverage. Now, I'm not going to take my rig apart, but what I will tell you guys is that when it comes to mounting the actual PCIe hardware inside of your computer, what you ideally want to see is you want to either have the PCIe card mounted above your graphics card, or you want to have it mounted in a PCIe, I believe it's ×4 slot, so one of those really skinny, tiny slots, because what ends up happening if you put it in a ×16 or even ×8 slot, what it'll do is it'll basically take a bunch of bandwidth away from your GPU, as well as from any of the other ×16 slots, and that essentially slows everything down to a crawl. So again, you want to make sure that if you're able to, put it into one of the skinny slots above your graphics card. If you can't do that, put it lower somewhere so that it's still taking up one of those smaller slots. If you happen to have a motherboard that also has an SSD drive connected into an MPCIe slot, for example, then you also want to make sure that your motherboard supports basically not sharing lanes on certain areas of those PCIe ports. Because what will happen sometimes is if one of the ports that you plug the Wi-Fi adapter into is sharing with your SSD, then you're also going to run into some problems in terms of bandwidth, and that's obviously not ideal. I haven't checked if mine actually does that yet. I'm going to, however, do that in a little bit just to make sure that that's not a problem for me. But again, you want to make sure that that's not happening so that you're able to get the most bandwidth out of your specific motherboard. That way you're not seeing any slowdowns or any kind of glitching. Alright, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's take a look at basically the adapter and how I've got that up and running by looking at the battery pack first. Alright, so we've got the battery pack in front of us right here, and basically the setup for this is really simple, and I'm actually going to link you guys with a tutorial on how to do this. It's basically an Instructables tutorial to get this up and running. I can't take any credit for making this work, but what essentially you end up doing is you end up getting one of these Anker battery packs, which I'll also link to you on Amazon. You end up getting some zip ties, in this case 2 of them, and ideally you use a zip tie gun. You basically run those all the way through right here, and then you want to make sure that you have the basically the ends of them coming out this way. Once you've got that, you end up putting some 3M VHB tape on the back right here, and you want to make sure that you've given it enough kind of space in here so that it actually sticks to the back of this, so that it doesn't end up moving around or shifting when you place it on your belt. And then all you have to do from that point on is simply place this thing over your belt, clasp it down, and then you simply want to make sure that it locks in place, and you've got yourself a battery pack that you can then wear, and then you can have your headset plugged into it. So again, very straightforward, and this gives you about 8 to 10 hours of playtime, depending on the games you're running and depending on how much power it's going to draw. But again, this is significantly better than what you will get out of the device stock, which is about 3 hours to 2 hours, maybe 4 if you're really lucky. But this basically doubles your playtime for only about $20 more than the standard battery pack. So again, huge deal, especially considering how much easier this makes your life. Now, moving on to the headset itself, you know, I figured that when I was starting out that the biggest issue I was going to have with this thing is not having the anti-SDE screen on here was going to be a huge, deal breaker for me. I thought for sure, this was going to be something that I was going to notice quite a bit. But interestingly enough, even though I'm thinking back to my original Vive, that one was pretty bad. Then I got the Odyssey, and on the Odyssey I could still see the screen door effect quite a bit, and I'm not sure if that had to do with the lenses, but on this specific unit, I'm no longer seeing the screen door effect as bad as I did on the original Odyssey, which is kind of interesting, because, maybe it has to do with the lenses, but this one, I'm not noticing it nearly as much, and to me it seems fine. It seems perfectly fine resolution-wise. Now the comfort is one of those things that is an absolute understatement. I figured that this thing, it weighs roughly a little bit more than the HMD Odyssey Plus, but, I figured with the amount of padding that the Odyssey had that it would have been a much more comfortable device, especially given the kind of awkward nature of the clasp that you have around the head. But actually what ends up happening is because of the extra padding that they put on the back, and because of the material that they used for the very soft foam on the actual headset itself right here, the amount of comfort that you get in this is just absolutely astounding. And because of the way that they've created the nose block and the actual foam that goes around your face, the little face shield, the light leakage is a non-issue with this headset at all. There's no light that gets in, which is fantastic. Significantly better than the Odyssey in that regard. Now, I haven't tested the front cameras to see what the quality is like on those. I'm sure that they're probably pretty good. But overall, the comfort level is incredible. The amount of adjustment is really good. The one thing that I'm a little bit more hesitant on is the eye relief adjustment, or the IPD, as well. What I have found is that the eye relief, even at its kind of maximum, I still don't get as good as a field of view as I had on the Odyssey Plus, or the original Odyssey, which is kind of interesting, and it may again have something to do with the lenses or even the display sizes themselves. I'm not sure if the display in here is the same as they use in the Odyssey, but it seems to me that for one reason or another, again, maybe because of the lenses or maybe because of the eye relief, it doesn't seem to give me as much of a field of view or as clear of a field of view as I had on the other one. This one feels much more like a binocular view than the Odyssey did. So that's one drawback there. And the other one kind of being that when you're adjusting the IPD on this, it seems to be kind of screwy, and I'm not sure if it's just my headset because it's used, but my button for adjusting it is, or the actual knob is kind of loose, and when it does move, it seems to take a while to actually get adjusted, which is kind of a strange feeling considering it's mechanical on the HMD Odyssey and the Odyssey Plus, and you can immediately feel it moving because the lenses are physically moving around, and you can see that kind of change right away. On this, it's not as clear when that's happening. You do get the little, notification within the Vive ecosystem that tells you, hey, your IPD has changed, but that's kind of about it. And so that's another kind of one of the drawbacks that I have with this headset so far. But beyond that, you know, just the ergonomics of everything really makes sense. I love the fact that you can actually flip the headphones out of the way when you're putting this on. With the Odyssey, you can kind of move them up and back, but not really out of the way. So when you're putting on the headset, this kind of feature makes a ton of sense, and it just makes life a lot easier when you're putting the headset on, also when you're taking it off. That way you don't accidentally damage the headphones, you know, kind of struggling to put the headset on because you can't see what you're doing. Let's move on to the actual wireless adapter and how well that works. I'll try and show you guys sort of the basics of how everything is set up on the PC side, and then we'll go into essentially how everything ends up looking once you're in game and you have everything up and running. So let's take a look at that next. One of the first things that you want to do, and I apologize for the mess, is you're going to want to start the Vive wireless application. Now at this point, your actual antenna, which is supposed to be plugged into the PCIe port on the computer, should be plugged in. Now you want to also make sure that your battery bank is up and running and that you've got that secured to your belt. So I'm going to go ahead and do mine right now, and that way we can get the headset plugged into it. And for the meanwhile, you can kind of see that it's actually scanning for any available headsets, and once we actually do have it plugged into the power bank, we will kind of see that change, and you'll see that it will detect the Vive Pro headset. Now mine has already been set up, but the nice thing about this tool is that what I have found is that overall, when you actually do plug this thing in, pretty much right away it will start setting up your device. So even if you didn't actually have the all of the kind of controllers and all the dongles for the original Vive Pro, or if yours are broken, it doesn't really matter because the wireless version is still going to work kind of regardless, and it'll work just fine and start detecting your device. So at this point, all I'm doing is plugging in the USB into the back of the Vive Pro adapter, and then plugging in the USB into my belt pack, which will then allow this device to power up. Now at this point, you want to actually make sure that your device is facing in the direction of the kind of antenna that sends the signal. Otherwise, what's going to end up happening is it won't be able to see the headset, and it therefore won't be able to pair either. So at this point, I'm just waiting for the device to power up, and as soon as it does that, you'll see that the status has now changed to ready. So at this point, the next step is to actually turn on the base stations that you have. That way they can actually start scanning for the headset. Now that the base stations are up, you're going to navigate into Steam VR, and you're going to turn that on. And then once inside of Steam VR, you'll just have to wait for a little bit for that to kind of power up. And at this point, it's a good time to go ahead and power on your controllers as well. So in my case, I'm going to be powering up my index controllers to get those up and going. And you want to make sure that the controllers are going to be in a stable spot so that they're also visible to the rest of the system before you are able to go ahead and power the whole system up. Now, at this point, we also want to make sure that we end up enabling basically the Steam VR interface. At this point, mine is on the HMD, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and launch into a game, and hopefully you guys will be able to see it from there. Alright, so it looks like it's launched me into the game, and at this point I've got my controls all good to go. Let's see if I can find my other controller and hopefully get my hands all set up and squared away. Now you can see that in this particular game in Contractors, they've enabled the update for the index controller, so you can actually see that when I'm moving my hands around, it's entirely tracking my fingers. Now my pinky kind of tends to curl under my other finger quite a bit, so unfortunately that one sometimes can be kind of sketchy, but otherwise for the most part, you know, everything sort of works pretty well. The finger tracking is pretty spot on, and it's able to get everything kind of up and running for the most part. Sometimes it's still a little bit glitchy, but I'm sure that that will kind of change over time. Let's see if I can fire up some crappy missions here. Actually, I just kind of want to shoot for now so that I'm not sort of doing any of that stuff by default. And then, you know, for the most part, it works extremely well. The best part is that a lot of people complain that the wireless adapter really kind of makes the quality of the video really terrible. And in my experience, I mean, I wish I could show you guys sort of the through the lens view. The only real drawback is actually sort of stuttering, which happens due to my graphics card. I have a Vega FE graphics card, and unfortunately the Vega FE is not really a gaming card, and it was never really designed for it. And even though it does have drivers that actually allow you to to use it as a gaming card, what I've found is that it's still not ideal. So I'm actually going to be getting a 1080 Ti, which will be coming in, because it's a lot cheaper than the 2080, and it will improve my performance in all games pretty much across the board. And also I'm going to be getting it liquid cooled because I already have the liquid cooling set up for the Vega FE, which will then allow me to run this thing pretty much flawlessly. Now I will, later on in the upgrading the CPU. For those of you who are curious, the CPU that I have in my rig right now is a 2700X, so it's basically sort of the 1.5 gen Ryzen CPU, and unfortunately what you'll see using the Ryzen CPU is you'll get some sort of like little artifacting here and there when you're looking sort of off into the distance, and that's compression artifacting, which happens due to the fact that my CPU is not really quite powerful enough. I have an Asus ROG Hero 7 motherboard, if I recall correctly, so it's the X470 chipset. I'm going to be sticking with that motherboard, but I'm going to be getting the Ryzen 3700X processor to replace the 2700X. So that will hopefully mitigate some of these issues that I'm having. And so it just goes to show you that this sort of wireless setup, it's incredibly amazing because again, you can just kind of move around all over the place. You can turn around as many times as you want, and basically there's no wires holding you back, which is just absolutely amazing. I mean, for me, this is such a big deal because I was always tripping over cables, and I was always kind of getting stuck in various spots and having to worry about a cable being on the ground. And also now that I'm fully back in the Vive ecosystem, I can actually see my chaperone. So I can see that, like right here, I've got like basically my wall, and I can't go this way because I'll hit my controller on something. So it's just awesome because it tells me exactly where everything is, so I know that I can't like really go too far in this direction because again my walls are going to be right over in that area over there. To me, this makes a huge difference, and especially being able to finally launch into the game with all the controllers working, it's just a huge huge improvement over the HMD Odyssey. Now, if you're wondering about does the resolution actually decrease, what it seems to me like is that they sort of use an adaptive resolution with the wireless adapter. So when you're actually looking around, and I don't know how clear it is on the video preview, but you can kind of see that in the distance some areas are a little bit more pixelated than stuff that's up close, and I think that has to do again with the CPU not being able to quite process that in the distance that way. But by and large, everything that I've seen so far, it just makes a huge difference in terms of just looks. To me, I haven't noticed some terrible compression that some people have talked about. I heard a lot of people say that with the wireless adapter you end up running into issues like the image quality is so bad that you just you can't even compare it to the wire. I haven't seen this personally. I think there's a little bit of judder associated with the wireless adapter, but it's not so much that it actually detracts from gameplay. And again, most of that is affected by my CPU. So if you're somebody with a 2700X, just keep in mind that if you have a similar CPU, something a little bit slower, or if you're on the Intel side, that you may be experiencing some latency. So let's see if I can actually start shooting at some stuff. I'm gonna see if I can kind of show you guys more or less what it all looks like. Now again, I'm not sure how well it's coming across in that sort of preview mode there, but as far as I know, let's see, I'm still kind of learning the controls for this thing as well, but by and large the shooting is very spot on. I do kind of want to actually experiment with getting something like a gun stock for this so that it actually ends up kind of making it a lot easier for me to do this sort of stuff. But by and large, I think that in this game it all works pretty well. I do kind of wish that there was a bolt release, as opposed to having to rack the release handle every single time. But as it stands, maybe that's something that I just haven't found in the settings themselves. I'm not 100% sure, but again, very very smooth, very fluid movement of the gun. Again, my card is not really up to spec for running this kind of stuff. As soon as there's some heavy amount of action that happens, everything really kind of tends to slow down. Like I think that if I do the grenade toss, I'm not sure how far I can actually toss that, but it tends to really like create a pretty serious slowdown. I guess maybe for that one it doesn't necessarily do it, but let's see what this does. That might actually blind me. But by and large, you know, if you're playing kind of just in these little like tutorial sections, it's not, you know, it's not too bad. But with the Vega FE, you're going to get some serious slowdowns that you wouldn't get with, for example, another, you know, kind of hardware. And you can kind of see it right there. As soon as the smoke starts going, it gets kind of sketchy for this particular game. But, you know, again, it works just fine. You know, you can actually off yourself if you press that button, which is kind of interesting. Let's see if we can get into another title here. Zero Caliber is one of those games that on my system just performs pretty terribly. So I'm going to kind of try and show you guys the worst case scenario for this wireless setup, because in my specific use case, it just looks really bad once you actually get into a mission. You know, by itself, it performs just fine, but you can kind of see that, you know, my CPU is getting taxed quite a bit. Like when I'm turning, also my graphics card just has a really difficult time kind of processing all the imagery that's happening here. So there's a lot of judder. It's really kind of slow, and that makes it significantly difficult to actually do anything, you know, kind of serious with this. So let's see if we can continue this mission right here. This one, you know, in general, even on the lower settings that I've selected at this point, it's very laggy. And you can kind of tell just by looking around that the frame rate is not really the highest. I'm going to see if I can pick this up and put it on my gun here. And again, you can already tell that I've had to lower the settings quite a bit. Now at this point it performs better, but you can already tell that everything's really pixelated and really kind of grainy. And this is actually less to do with the adapter and more to do with my GPU. But as the 1080 comes in, I'm hoping that things will really improve, especially for this game. I believe that this game runs on Unreal Engine 4, so that's kind of another part of the problem for you know, this specific title, is that it just does not perform well on AMD hardware in general. And to me, that's a big no-no, because I am going to be spending quite a bit of time in VR, and especially I want to be able to actually play this game. And you know, just the quality being lowered as much as it is definitely not appreciated. And you can see that, you know, my FPS just tanks right here. I'm hovering somewhere around like 20 to 30 FPS, which is, you know, a little bit absurd considering the fact that the Vega FE is a 16 gig card. It's one of their newer generation cards, so, you know, just being able to perform as terrible as it does here is pretty disappointing. Now, the one cool feature that I like in all of these games that you kind of forget about when you're playing most FPSs is that you actually have to like rack the gun yourself. You know, typically in most other shooters, that's not something that you actually have to pay attention to, because your guy just does, you know, all the work for you essentially. Not so much the case here, where, you know, you're having to do all this stuff yourself, and that's, you know, that's a big difference, because, you know, again, this is something that you just have to pay attention to in the real world. Otherwise, your gun's not going to work as properly as it does. But, you know, in contractors, I've also found that there doesn't seem to be a bolt release option, which is a little bit disappointing, again, because you have to keep doing this every single time. But I guess it does make for a little bit of kind of gun porn if you're into the, you know, sort of super sexy reloads that everything has. And there are a bunch of different guns that, you know, you can use in this game, which are all, you know, pretty awesome. Like I have this the sniper rifle here, which, you know, I believe it has like a night vision scope. So now it's kind of difficult to see because it's daytime. It's also got a rangefinder. You know, you've got a suppressor on there. You've got a bipod to be able to put this thing on. And also, you know, again, you can just throw away your clip and then go into here to get another one. And then you're kind of good to go. And I haven't shot the gun, so I don't need to actually rack it, but you kind of get the idea from there. Again, I don't know why, but with this scope, it's like impossible to actually see anybody through it. I can kind of, you know, sort of use my two eyes to aim and shoot that way, but it's definitely not ideal and not the most precise. So it's kind of difficult to actually shoot people this way. But as it stands, you know, again, very, very neat kind of system for using guns in general. although sometimes I can't quite let go of things the way that I would like to let go of them. So here's the, I want to say it's the L85 or something like that. I always forget this thing's name. But anyhow, very cool gun, very nice kind of effect on the 3D scope, and the wireless adapter is not really, making anything any more blocky than it would have already been had I been using a wire, which again is a pretty huge difference, and mostly my computer is the bottleneck. So let's try another game that's also kind of bright but runs a little bit better. I'm going to jump into Tallis here, and you'll kind of be able to see, just how much better that game actually performs. To me, that one is just a significantly better looking game in general, and you can kind of see that my CPU is just getting very taxed in here. It just looks terrible, and my graphics card is also having quite a hard time handling this system as well. But going into Tallis VR, we're going to be able to kind of see a much better environment than we did in the other games as well. So again, to me, this one was specifically a little bit more optimized for AMD hardware, so it does perform, slightly better. And if you do happen to have two AMD cards, I believe their engine actually supports Crossfire in VR for this game, as well as the Serious Sam games, but don't quote me on that. I want to say that it's, it's the same engine, so it just makes life, that much easier, because again, if you do have a dual AMD card setup, then you'll really be able to take advantage of that and be able to actually have everything work for you. Again, this is another one where the index controllers are fully tracked, so you have, full finger control, and even though it doesn't actually, really come into play in this specific title as much as it does in some of the other ones, I feel like it's still a very cool, cool little method of being able to give you that extra layer of immersion. And again, being able to just move without wires is just a huge difference. To me, it seriously makes all the difference in the world, just being able to do this alone. Now this guy, I don't know if I can actually get past him without him killing me. I hope I can. But this specific game, it's always kind of hard to just let go of the... Yeah, so I always die on this section because I'm just never quick enough. But let's see if I can actually do this. Again, you can kind of tell almost right away that there is still some artifacting happening, just because of the fact that the CPU can't handle it. My graphics card, again, is not really the best card for VR, but, very cool finger tracking in this game as well. I don't see any additional latency in this title, mainly because it does perform a lot better than my other setup did. And again, you want to make sure that when you install the wireless adapter, that you install it in the correct PCIe slot, so that you're actually able to get the full performance out of it, or as much performance as you can. And obviously, as I've said earlier, you want to limit how many other devices you have sharing your PCIe lanes. So ideally, any other cards that you might have running in your system, you want to either take out or disable, so that you don't actually have them, populating those lanes and taking up the extra spots, so that you have the maximum amount of bandwidth that you could possibly have, just dedicated specifically to the wireless adapter. Now I'm going to see if I can actually kind of head back so we can explore that area a little bit better, because I don't want to keep dying in that spot and basically boring everyone. But, even just looking kind of far off in this title, I can already see that there's not a whole lot of compression happening, because I played this wired before and I saw the exact same visuals. There is just a little bit of judder when moving around, but again, I have a feeling that that's more due to my hardware than it is actually due to the wireless adapter. Now, once I do get my beefier CPU and also my GPU, I'll be doing some retests, and I'll also kind of share my FPS figures for various games, so that you guys can get an idea of whether or not the hardware that you have right now will meet the requirements for using this adapter, and whether or not it's worth it to you. But to me, so far, I honestly think that the difference in not having a wire is so massive that it's 100% worth it. I can't see myself going back to a wired solution again, just because the difference is night and day. And once I move my VR space downstairs into the garage, where I'll actually be able to roam more, it's going to make even more of a difference, because I'm still pretty constrained in my room where I am right now. But in the garage, it's going to be a huge kind of night and day difference as far as the ability to do things, swing around freely, and so on. And just not having a cable dragging behind you not having to worry about that is just a world changer, because it feels like a standalone headset. With the extra padding that the wireless adapter gives you, you also don't really feel this thing on your head. Now you might think that because it does add some extra weight, that there's going to be an issue in terms of, your head's going to get more tired really quickly, but that doesn't actually happen to me. I've been able to play for, a consistent like 3 to 4 hours with really not feeling anything afterwards. The only real kind of slight discomfort that I get is from the face pad, from the headset being pressed this way due to the way that the Vive Pro is designed, but that's really just a minor gripe, and not something that, should really be taken into consideration when getting this headset, because everyone's face is going to feel a little bit different with this face pad. And again, you can also get the VR covers to kind of minimize that sort of pain for yourself, so that doesn't really matter in the end anyway. Now, this thing does get kind of warm. Now, I don't really feel it on the back of my head. Some people have said that it gets so uncomfortably warm that they actually can feel it kind of burning the back of their head. Personally, I have not had this problem, but the device does get warm, and I've noticed that after a couple of hours of gameplay, you do start to get slightly wonkier tracking, and I think that's due to the heat in the adapter itself. So what I will be doing is I will be doing a fan mod for my adapter, using the original battery pack as well. So I will have 2 battery packs hanging off my person, but I think that it should probably work okay. I'm going to try and see if I can use the my current battery pack to kind of power the fan as well, so that I don't have to have 2 of them hanging off, but we'll see how that works and whether or not that starts decreasing the amount of time that I can spend in the device to a point where it actually makes life quite difficult for me. But we'll kind of see, how that goes as time goes on. Again, for the time being, it just feels so nice not being able to have to worry about, tripping over things, breaking cords off at the back of my laptop. Especially when you have, kind of folks coming in and out of your room. One of the biggest problems is that somebody could kind of trip over the cable without even you tripping over it. And with this, the possibility of that happening is completely eliminated. So, you have this one cable, you never have to unplug stuff and plug stuff in. You can just leave the adapter where it is, and when you're ready to go, all you have to do is just get the battery pack out, and then you are good to go. You just clip that onto your belt, and you can fire up the whole system and be ready to game at that point. Now, I did just see a little bit of, extra pixelation right here, and you can see some of it kind of in the cloud area over there. The clouds kind of tend to be blocky when you start moving your head around really quick. But again, this is not something that I've tested on other hardware, so I think that being able to test with, some additional kind of pieces of hardware and faster hardware will allow me to actually rule out the possibility that it is in fact the adapter that's causing this versus, my hardware just kind of being crappy, which, it could very well be. Now, it's not that my machine is a slouch by any means, but for VR, you definitely need kind of a top-of-the-line system to actually be able to experience it fully, 100%, without any sort of big major issues happening. So that'll kind of conclude things for the VR portion of this video. I'm going to jump into kind of, just showing you the headset again, offline, and then we'll see how that goes, and I'll give you my final thoughts before I move on to my next series in this video to actually show you the various frame rates and how well it performs in there. So hang on for the next part of the video, and we'll talk about some final closing points before we end this one. So in closing, folks, I think that the wireless adapter is 100% worth it. To me, again, just cutting the cord finally and being able to use this system completely wirelessly is just a game changer. Once you try the wireless system, you're never really want to go back to the sort of stock setup with the wires dangling behind you. And as I've said, in my personal experience, I haven't seen too much artifacting that's super distracting. Some people have said that to them, just even that little bit is the deal breaker. But to me, I find that most of the drawbacks with this thing have to do more with my personal hardware than they have to do with the adapter itself. And again, there's not really a adapter like this on the market right now for any other headset. Now, TPcast, as I've said in my previous video, they are coming out with something for Windows Mixed Reality, so if that's your thing, you can wait on and see how that goes. Personally, I'm not really holding my breath right now because TPcast have had sort of a poor history with their first adapter. I'm really hoping that they change that with the next release, and especially with their 2.0 model, which should support even higher resolutions for something like the Pimax. But again, you know, it's still kind of a ways off, whereas this system is available right now, and it works really well if your hardware is up to the task. So I think that you should really consider, you know, whether or not you want to go this route, and if you do, you should consider getting yourself a rig that's either really powerful or upgrading the hardware that you have, unless you've already got the hardware to run this sort of stuff. Again, you know, sort of the recommended hardware, I think, unfortunately it pains me to say this, but you want to have at least a 1080 Ti or up. So the 20 series cards will definitely be kind of a bit of a leg up as well. So anything like the 2070 Ti, and anything sort of beyond that is going to do really well. Obviously, if you have a Titan card, that will also kind of handle the VR experiences pretty well as well. The Vega FE unfortunately struggles in quite a few games. I have found that the performance can be just downright abysmal in some of them, because unfortunately Unreal Engine is also the engine that powers a lot of these experiences, and the result is that you have a lot of games that just perform really poorly on AMD hardware. So I would say that if you are running on AMD hardware, in general for VR, it's not really a good solution for you. You'll want to probably go NVIDIA. That may change with the 5700, 5800 series from AMD. I have heard some pretty good things in the performance of those cards, and they seem to be pretty much on par with these early release drivers with the Vega 56 and 64 cards. Not really quite beating out the Radeon 7, but at least you're able to get some comparable performance there. And I think with driver updates and sort of frequent releases, they'll be able to bring the VR performance up to par with at least the 1080 series cards from NVIDIA. At least that is my hope right now. But as it stands, this is what it is. I will be doing an FPS video showing you basically, I have I believe like 30 games installed in my library right now. And so I can do a kind of benchmark or a basic benchmark showing you the frame rates that I'm getting with the Vega FE card, and then I'll end up doing the same thing with the 1080 Ti card that I have coming in. Now I'm hoping that I'll be able to kind of get a baseline with the air-cooled card, and then once I get the water block on there, I'll do kind of another test with the card overclocked and see how the frame rates are affected at that point. So hang on for that video, look out for that coming up. And also, if you like this video, please do give the video an actual like. If you also like the channel, go ahead and subscribe. I will be bringing more VR content, and I'll try and post at least once or twice a week, depending on how my time is. And hopefully this video has been in slightly better quality than it was in the past, due to the fact that I now am actually recording in 4K. So I'll see you all in the next video.